It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. This was going to be the day where I was going to talk about how horrible Ronald Reagan was as a president for working people. This was going to be the day where I'm not going to say celebrated, I'm not going to say observed, where we, remember just how horrible the Reagan administration was, and the 40th anniversary of him firing the Patco workers, which was the shot heard across the boardrooms, and opened up 40 years now of assaults, all-out assaults on organized labor, all-out assaults on workers' rights, culminating in what we saw just a couple of months ago in Bessemer, Alabama, with Amazon spending $200 million to deny 5,000 workers their right to better wages, hours, conditions, to actually having some voice on the job. I was going to spend the time talking about that because it is a significant part of our history. It's an important part of our history. It's important to remember the ramifications of Ronald Reagan's actions and what has been, 40 years plus of stagnant and declining wages. What we took for granted back then, having been eviscerated over this time frame. Overtime after 8 hours, a weekend, health care as something that you didn't pay for out of your pocket. It was part of your compensation package. I mean, you think about the changes Reagan forward to what's happened in the workplace and the shrinking of labor and the attack on organized workers. It's pretty substantial. And I was going to go through some of that, but today, sad news. Rich Trumka, who was the president of the AFL-CIO, passed away this morning, evidently a massive heart attack. He was 72 years old. But in the moment when labor needed a champion and needs, still does, and my thoughts and my hopes are with Liz Schuler as she picks up the mantle where Rich left off in this most important moment in labor history, where we desperately need the passage of some labor law reform. The PRO Act, at the minimum, a repeal of Taft-Hartley would be preferable. But our thoughts and our hopes are with her in this moment. And what Rich Trumka would have wanted. Today I spent some time, talking with friends who knew him, as I did, remembering, times that we spent. You do that through the grieving process. And, one moment stuck out in my mind because I'd had the opportunity to interview Rich Trumka several times over the years. He was a fan of the show. He would come on when we would request it. But one time really sticks out in my mind. And that was, we had visited his office, me and my producer, Arnold. And, we had this we were going to do like a 30-minute interview. We ended up staying like 2.5 hours, just going through, having this incredibly long conversation about the future of labor, the hopes, the direction that things have to go. And, he had brought up our 2013 labor history tour. This was just a couple years back. He had brought up the fact that he had followed our labor history tour as we went across the country, uncovering, the evisceration of labor's history by corporate America. And, we got into this long conversation of, how he almost got killed in Blair, West Virginia. And, he understood, and we had this long conversation about the Friends of Coal and the corporate money that's gone into changing workers' hearts and minds. And it's not as easy as it once was to figure out which side people are on. We talked about the Battle of Blair Mountain. We talked about the Mount Olive Cemetery in Illinois, where the United Mine Workers were buried because no other cemetery in the area would allow union people to be buried in their cemetery. so the mine workers bought their own. We just talked about all this stuff, and I brought up that I had regretted during our tour being unable to get down to Ludlow because we didn't have time to get from Denver all the way down to Ludlow. It closed by the time we got there, and it was one of those things. I missed this window because it was this was 2013. It was the 99th anniversary of it happening, and in that moment, a spark popped into his eye, and he jumps up and he goes, "I got something." And he takes us back into this little room off the side of his office, where he has all this memorabilia and all this mine worker stuff, because he was the mine workers president for a number of years, actually worked in the mines himself, and he pulled out this pin, just a little pin, maybe an inch or so big. But it had a tiny little picture of a person in their casket. I mean, it was just their face, obviously, but this person's in their casket. And it was one of the people murdered during the Ludlow Massacre. This is this is over 100 years ago now. This is 1914 this happened. And this is he was saying one of the most cherished prized possessions he had, and it spurred this conversation of working people figuring out which side they were on. Because there was part of me said, I go, that's kind of morbid, wearing a picture of someone's corpse on your chest. And he's going, no, it's the ultimate of, which side are you on in this? And remembering the people who died for just the basic rights that we now take for granted today. And I'll tell you, in that conversation, my respect for him grew enormously. Because look, up until that point, I had viewed him like a lot of people do. These are just, these are guys who won elections. These are bureaucrats. These are, folks who are, they're doing the work, yes, but you don't see the humanity. You don't see the heart in it. And it was in that moment that, I said, this guy gets it. And we had this long conversation about messaging and how, we've been trained like Pavlovian dogs to identify, as I say, it's kind of like a worker's version of Stockholm syndrome, that we don't really realize, which side of the equation we're on. And we're going to go through this again. This is another one of these moments, and something we've talked about in the program for years, is that eventually the idea of the benevolent corporation will come to our minds and go, well, that was stupid. Because corporate America is about corporate America. That's it. They don't care about you. They don't care about me. All they care about is bottom line. There are no benevolent companies. There are some good ones, but they're not benevolent. And this was one of those things that, as I remember our conversation and the interview that followed, it was all about how do we mobilize more militant working people. Leadership can only do so much. Because I know Trumka had taken some hits a couple of years ago because, during the Trump years, they weren't willing to go on general strikes. They weren't willing to do a lot of the things that a lot of more aggressive militant type labor people like me were saying we need to be doing. And he was smart enough to understand that we're not there yet. As a working class, we're not at the point of hey, let's shut everything down. Because once you go racing out into the middle of this stuff, you may realize there's nobody behind you. You have to build that. That has to be something that's from the bottom up, not from the top down. And, I respected his view on that. And it's, again, one of those reasons that I was not a really big critic. I was someone who said, look, it's a tough job he's in. Being the person who puts out all the fires between the different unions and all of that. And I thought he did it with style and grace and professionalism. I thought he did as good a job as anyone could have done. But it was those moments that, I'll tell you, over the years where I had the opportunity to sit down with him and talk about the issues of the time, that he's going to be remembered as someone who was on the right side of history. And I don't say that lightly. He's someone who came out in the moment when it mattered. You go back to 2008, he told the story of going back to his hometown and meeting a woman that he had known in his hometown who would never vote for Obama because he's a black guy. And him saying, shame on you for that. Shame on you because, this is about someone who wants to rebuild our town. This is about someone who wants to bring jobs back. It shouldn't matter the color of their skin. It shouldn't matter. And early on, he was a big supporter of Obama's. Now, to his credit, and this is where I give Rich Trumka credit, when Obama did something that he wasn't in favor of, he stood up to him. And I'm talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement. These trade deals were bad across the board. Obama said no new trade deals, and Trumka held him to that. In fact, they torpedoed the AFL-CIO, and here people like me, people on this show, we torpedoed that to ensure that there weren't more bad free trade agreements. And it's one of those things that even Obama recognized that he didn't think the AFL had that kind of power. And this is the point that I want to get to here, because this is an opportunity. Mourn the passing of Rich Trumka. Remember him for who he was, but pick the mantle up and move forward. Pick the mantle up and go, how do we rebuild that most prosperous working class in history? How do we do the things that we need to do? How do we provide opportunity? How do we get what a former AFL leader, Samuel Gompers, said we wanted? More of the good things in life and less of the bad. More leisure and less vice. More books and less bad things. More schools and less prisons. How do we get to that place? We do that through organizing. We do that through militant organizing, through demanding that things get better for working people. Something that Rich Trumka fought for his entire time as president of the AFL. Now, as I said, this is a moment in history. This is a moment in history where more than ever, we need to take that mission of moving the ball forward. As people know, Rich Trumka was he played football for Joe Paterno at Penn State. My buddy Jake loves to remind me he was a heck of a lineman. He was ferocious. Take that and move the ball forward. Take that and make sure that we have the ability to make lives better. Because that's what Trumka got up every day to do. And if you listen to his speeches, it was all about how do we make everyone's life better. Back in 2014, he gave a speech at one of the conventions that people still talk about. In fact, I think they coined it Labor's first viral YouTube moment, where he talked about, my brother killed my sister's son. And it was he gave the speech about Michael Brown being killed by a police officer who was a union member, and Michael Brown's mother, who was a union member as well. And how labor has to deal with this, and how working people have to come together and find solutions to this stuff. Way ahead of his time, way out in front of this stuff. And this is where I come back to where my belief is. My belief is in the workplace, through our collective bargaining agreements, through our union agreements, we can make the changes in society that we need. And not only, we don't just need visionary leaders like Rich Trumka was, but we need visionary members. We need people who are going to internalize what the leadership is saying, or if the leadership is wrong, to move them in the right direction. The one thing that I believe in is unions are democracy in the workplace. True Athenian democracy, one person, one vote. And if you don't like the direction things are going, you have the ability to make change. We're at this moment. And as I said, I wish Liz Schuler nothing but the best, who was the Secretary of Treasurer. She will ascend to the presidency for the remainder of this term. And the hope is that we give her the backing she needs to get what we need in this moment. As Mother Jones said, mourn the dead, but fight like hell for the living. Now more than ever is time to fight like hell for the living. That's what Rich Trumka would have wanted. He would have wanted people to go, yep, sorry he's gone. Have the funeral, have your cry, whatever it is you need, but get up, dust yourself off, and move forward and make people's lives better. Back Liz Shuler at this moment, give her what she needs, because this is the battle of our time. If we get nothing through our folks in D.C., if we get no labor law reform, if we get nothing to help people organize, if we get nothing to protect people on the job, I guarantee you in 2022, when Republicans take state houses and governor's mansions across this country, they are going to pass anti-worker legislation that is just going to rip work apart in this country. Pennsylvania is slated to be the next right-to-work state. If that happens, that will be another slice in the body of organized labor. So from this moment, under the guise of mourn the dead, fight like hell for the living, this is kind of the moment where you recommit. We won't go backwards. We cannot allow more attacks on workers' rights. We can't allow more attacks on laws that protect workers in the workplace. And this is where the politics of this is important. I had someone say, well, he was nothing but the Pied Piper of money for the Democratic Party. And that's not true. He was the Pied Piper of helping people who were going to help workers. And sadly, the only political party that was willing to do that was the Democratic Party. The Republicans for the last 40 years, and on this day, Ronald Reagan fired the Patco workers. Their mission has been to destroy our ability to make better wages, hours, conditions, to have a voice on the job, to have say in the place where we spend a good portion of our lives. I'd like to thank all the folks who sent me memories and photos of Rich. I had a friend send me a picture of her and I with Rich. And, again, it brought back the memories of great conversations and promise for the future. And the ability of people to come together and agree on how we move forward. And we need this more than ever. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you have memories, thoughts of the former AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka? I'd love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to a couple of AFL-CIO presidents from across the country. I'll get some thoughts from them and where we go from here. So quick break, right back with West Virginia AFL-CIO President Josh Sword. Right back after this.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.